Hi, and welcome to Filmmakers Compass Podcast, a show where we talk about movies and, well, more movies. I'm D-Man, joined by CP. And CP, how are you doing today?
I am very happy that you are back on this show.
Yeah, me too. It's been a while since we've been conversing via Zoom video. So I call you all the time, but we haven't done a video call in a while. So it's great to be recording again and be actually having the conversations between us that I think it's not quite the same when one of us isn't here.
I know. I would actually go on to say it sucks.
Yeah, it's just not the same. Like, sort of need this dynamic. So I love it. I'm glad we're back. Before we jump into our segment this week, though, we do got to do our shout outs as normal. So first up, I want to shout out both my dad and my sister celebrated their birthdays this week. So happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, I hope you guys had a fantastic birthday and did something really fun. Like, I don't know, went out to dinner and had your favorite meal, or got super drunk, or maybe went and saw Madam Web.
Or Star Wars.
I happened to watch Star Wars on my birthday, watched A New Hope, of course, and it was amazing. So can't complain. But also, while we're doing shout outs, on that note, speaking of my birthday, I would also like to thank everybody who actually sent me a message or a voicemail, called, whatever, and just wish me a happy birthday. All the social media posts, really appreciate it. You know, it makes the day really fun because you're just constantly getting messages all day long and you're like, oh, great. It feels like my birthday because I don't get that many messages. So I don't know about you, CP. You're just getting messages all day long?
I mean, yeah, I'm a pretty popular guy, you know.
Oh, okay.
Sort of a big deal.
I figured that's what
I host a podcast. I don't know if you know that. So, you know, there's a lot of people that have opinions on that.
Got to give a shout out to Joe Rubio, who I actually met up with him at another birthday party. He was asking about the podcast. So I told him that, hey, the show is back. We have new episodes. So hopefully he's been able to catch up. And when you get here, you will hear this shout out.
Yay!
So Joe, thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. And then I did want to shout out Drucker and Ivor, just because I love you guys. So yeah, hope that helps. So anyway, CP, any shout outs on this episode?
No, I brought it up on the last episode, so I was going to say it now. I got a DM on Facebook that one of our friends from G-Town started listening to the podcast. She saw that I had a podcast, so she clicked on it and she listened. And she told me that she was listening to it. And I'm like, man, that voice with CP sounds so familiar. And then as soon as we wrapped up the episode, she's like, oh my gosh, it's Dustin. And I've known that guy pretty much my entire life because we all went to elementary school together. So again, Courtney, thank you for checking out the show. And there you go, D-Man.
Welcome to the podcast and welcome back into my life. Fantastic. That's always so exciting to hear somebody new is checking out the show. So love it. And does that wrap up your shout outs?
Wraps up my shout outs.
All right. Well, then let's jump into the episode now and we'll throw it over to you with a little box office breakdown.
That is right. This is going to be our box office breakdown. So if you have been to the movies recently, maybe you went to see something awesome like Madam Web or not.
Hope not.
It was only number 4 in the box office and it only made $35 million.
How much do you estimate that cost to make? Because
I would say about 110. That's my guess. Off the top of my head.
That's crazy because
I did not check the numbers, but that's my guess.
You would think the studio would be tracking estimates on what this is going to make. And I mean, I cannot imagine they were like, we have a hit on our hands. They're probably like, what is the fallout going to be? And where do you think they lost this movie? Like with the fans? Do you think it was the first trailer? Like that was it? Or did fans just never ask for this?
I think that's the bigger issue. I think it's kind of, well, for one, Sony does not have a great track record. I actually enjoyed both the Venom movies, but they didn't really perform super well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then they came out with this godforsaken Morbius movie, which is like the worst comic book movie ever made. And so they followed up with let's make a Madam Web movie that's gonna redeem us.
Yeah, I have to say the Venom movies at least had like fun
And
attached
they
to
have
it. You're
Tom
like,
Hardy like star power, at its best. And
yeah.
they own kind of like the Venom comic book character. Like,
I mean, they even got Woody.
yeah,
Like, that's kind of
yeah.
a big deal. I mean, if he joins, you'd think, right? You'd have at least something on your hands. And that's the thing with this whole kind of Spider-Verse or whatever they're calling it, the Sony Spider-Verse.
Mhm.
It's like I don't know what they're doing with it. Like I
No.
don't know where any of this is going, and it shows.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say it's painfully clear. So the number 3 movie in the box office is the film Ordinary Angels, and I don't think
Haven't
that this
seen.
is actually a testament to how well the box office doing is at this moment, because it made just over 6 million this past weekend, which is not exactly screaming, box office hit.
Well, and the other thing too is like when you look at it, it is relative. I mean, again, we asked how much Madam Web cost to make and what they probably spent promoting it. Maybe this is actually a win for this movie. It's still
Mhm.
$6 million.
Yeah. The number 2 one I found to be surprising. It's actually the Demon Slayer film, which made close to 12 in
It's funny you
its
say that. I
first week
texted
out.
my shout out Andres. Texted him. I took a photo when I was at the movies, and I saw the poster for that Demon Slayer movie, and I was like, "Oh, dude, you should go."
Well,
So
Andres, if you go, let us know if it's something we need to go check out.
yeah, send me a comment on text or something, and we'll share that in the shout outs next week.
And the number 1 movie in America currently is the Bob Marley film One Love, which has grossed about $72 million in the box office, which seems to be on track for, I think, what Sony expected. You
Profitability.
saw this one, right, D-Man?
I did. It was actually pleasantly right in line with what I expected from that sort of musician biopic movie. We've had Bohemian Rhapsody, Rocket Man, and I think they have one coming out about Amy Adams, or I'm sorry, Amy Winehouse.
Mm.
And it falls right into that genre where I don't think it's doing anything groundbreaking or different than things we've seen before it. But what it did do was obviously bring to the forefront Bob Marley's music. But more than that, I think it shines a light on the fact that in today's kind of portrayals of Bob Marley, we always think of maybe like Good Vibes and Marijuana and Rastafarian hair and palm
Hmm.
trees and just, let's be cool, man.
Yeah.
One love, like that vibe. And I think, people forget that Bob Marley was actually, a very political person. And there were a lot of things that happened in his life that, sort of aren't defined necessarily by the music as it's perceived today. Because
Yeah.
I know a lot of those songs, but I didn't know, I mean, how political he was within both his home country, within the Rastafarian, uh, sort of culture and some of these different things. So he was kind of a big deal. And I think the movie does an excellent job of highlighting those parts of his life that maybe, people who weren't around or have only experienced his music recently at, some music festivals or something, cover bands. You're like,
Hmm.
pretty cool.
So when we turn our attention to the international box office, I just want to kind of focus on 2 things. Obviously, The Beekeeper is still the number 1 movie of the year. It came out in
Statham still killing it.
mid January, and it's still making money. But the Bob Marley movie has quickly caught up. It is the number 2 movie internationally, and year to date, it has made $120 million worldwide. So that's turning out to be a really good film for Paramount.
Pretty much going to be profitable. And not only that, but Bob Marley, his music is all over the world.
Now, what I do find is interesting is when we drop to the number 5 movie in the worldwide box office, that's actually Madam Web,
So
which is
people
I
did.
find shocking. And it's made $77 million, with actually the bulk of that coming from foreign markets. So
I was
maybe
gonna say
that should
so
be.
more than the YouTubers went just so they could trash it.
Yeah, so I guess all I'm saying is maybe it's not going to end up being as bad a day for Columbia Pictures as they were expecting it was going to be.
Yeah, well, the international market, I mean, it's pretty crazy because it can salvage many a film, just in terms of overall numbers. I bet there's plenty of executives at movie studios that are like, let's wait till the international comes in,
Yeah,
and
right.
then we'll determine how bad the fallout is. So,
So that's the box office. I don't know what the rest of you have seen, but if you've seen something recently, let us know your thoughts on it.
and get out to the movies because this week we have Dune Part 2 coming
I
out.
know, dude. I'm so excited about it. I've already bought
CB,
3 tickets for this movie. Yes.
I did want to clarify something with you. So this is Dune Part 2, but I have heard rumors and even saw a quote confirmation from the director about a potential Part 3. Now, is Part 2 actually the end of what would be the original Dune novel?
Yes. He said that he wants to turn it into a trilogy. Part 2 ends the novel Dune story, and part 3 is going to be a condensed version of the sequel novel, which is Dune Messiah.
Okay, because I was like, did they really break Dune up into 3 parts? I mean, I could get it, right? I mean,
Mhm.
they did it with The Hobbit. Like, it could happen. You just get a trilogy out of it. But yeah, I was curious because I was like, I was under the impression when they started it that it was only going to be cut in half. And then I was hearing rumblings of a part 3.
I think that the difference is the niece wants it to be a trilogy. I don't know that Warner Brothers has greenlit it for a trilogy yet. If you remember, the stupid thing they did is when they greenlit part 1, they did not greenlight a part 2. They
That's
had to wait
wild to
until
me.
after it came out to decide if they were going to, finish the story. So,
That is crazy. Like when studios do that, like for right now, we're not going to talk about the actual series because I haven't finished it yet. But I don't know if you've heard on Netflix, they dropped Avatar: The Last Airbender, and they did book 1, Water.
mhm.
It's 8 episodes long, and what I read though was that they're only greenlighting book 2 if book 1 does well.
That's stupid.
And I was like, I just don't understand if, Avatar itself is this whole complete story unless you're, willing to see it through the end. Why even bother?
That's the thing that and for me, I look at it and I'm like, well, obviously you're either not confident enough in the project or in the creators behind the project if you have to add these caveats.
Yeah, there's got to be something to it. But that's weird though because then you look at Dune Part 1 and you have that director who is fantastic by almost all accounts. Everything he's worked on, especially in science fiction, has been incredible.
Mhm.
So for them, I mean, and then it's Dune. This is a beloved novel. It's already been made into a movie once. People are familiar with the material. This isn't John Carter from Mars, where people are like, "What's that?"
Mhm. Mhm.
Despite how good the movie is, they just didn't know what it was.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I just can't believe that they didn't greenlight part 2, but whatever. We got it anyway. So it's
Mhm.
a win. And so far, CP, I have heard good things, but I'm reserving, the hype train. I'm not going to ride it into the theater.
Well, I'm
I'm
just going
just
to
going to
tell
go.
everybody whatever your plans are for March 1st, call in sick for work now, cancel whatever you're doing, buy your ticket and go see it on the big screen.
Yeah, I know that was something that you really, really hit home with me with Dune Part 1, which was it had been released simultaneously on HBO Max at that time, Max. And I had watched it at home. And you had told me you're like, you gotta go to the theater. So I did go during, I think it was like 2021,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
at that time, nobody was really going to the theaters still. And you're like, D-man, you gotta go. Like you gotta experience it on the big screen. So I did go. And you were right. It was definitely a movie worthy of the big screen. And so I'm very excited for part 2 because I think, that's where science fiction lives. That's where
Mhm.
special
Mhm.
effects are special. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I really enjoyed part 1. Part 1. I just rewatched it, so I'm all primed and ready to go. For our main topic this week, CP, I wanted to talk a little bit about some movies that you and I actually saw in anticipation of the upcoming Academy Awards, the Oscars, because we have a couple of nominations here that people have already started winning awards. They've been nominated for awards at other award shows. And these were movies that, when you go back to our episode, when we talked about 2023, that I believe we had both mentioned as wanting to have seen. So we did have a chance to watch those movies, and both of us watched both of the movies. And those films are Maestro and The Holdovers.
And just to let you know, we are going to be bringing up spoilers.
I want to throw it over to you a little bit. Let's talk about these movies and sort of what worked and what didn't. And are we going to watch them again? I don't know. So tell me your thoughts.
Tell you my thoughts. Okay. Maestro was a confusing movie. And I just have to put that out there for the audience. It felt confusing to me because it felt like a film that Bradley Cooper made with these lofty expectations that he was going to be considered for an Academy Award on the performance side.
Yes.
And also on the directorial side. And I love Bradley Cooper, but this was a miserable failure on both accounts in my mind. And part of it is, the first thing that I noticed is watching the portrayal of Leonard Bernstein. Immediately in my mind, I was thinking, why was Sean Penn not cast in this role? I'm like, this was made for Sean Penn. Sorry, Bradley Cooper, but that's that. But the second thing is this. It felt like a movie that missed all the really juicy pieces of drama. And I remember the movie started with a quote. And I think this quote is really important as we look at the film, because it's a quote from Leonard Bernstein. And he says, "A work of art does not answer questions. It provides them. And its essential meaning is the tension between the contradictory answers." So
I love that quote. That's a
great question about, I think all artists need to be thinking about art in that way.
Yeah, that's a fantastic quote.
Problem that I had is Bradley Cooper did not read that quote and use it in the film that he was creating. I mean, I don't know a lot about Leonard Bernstein. He's way before my time, but obviously he was really good at what he did.
Yeah.
And as a character, we're set out with a couple pieces of his personality early on that I think create a very interesting character with interesting dynamics. Two things. One, we know that he is apparently an amazing composer, and they say he has the ability to be essentially the greatest American composer of all time.
Yeah, and at this point, when they're actually making these proclamations, there really weren't great American composers. They were mostly European.
Yeah. And two, he says it himself. He says, "Hey, I love everybody." And he's this people person who is infatuated with other human beings. Now, as we go through the film is almost portrayed like a bullet point. If we were reading a Wikipedia page of who is this man, we'd get information. He went here. He did this. He wrote this music. He was addicted to drugs. He had affairs. And that's such a, how do I want to say it? That's such a cheapening of this character that we're trying to see played out in drama.
Okay. Yeah, I do agree with you. I think, for our listeners, the film is sort of broken up into two halves. One is like a black and white first half, which is very sort of artistic indie film. And then the second half switches over to color, and it sort of delves into the darker side of some of these indulgences in his life and a little bit of the fallout. But I do agree with you that I don't think the movie dives deep enough here into sort of what's motivating this behavior. What is the actual sort of fallout, right? Like the fact that he has to confront some of these issues, like because some headlines might come out and he has to talk to his daughter. You're like, yeah, I can understand why that would be a difficult conversation with your daughter. But at the same time, I mean, once that conversation's over, it's kind of over.
Well, and I think, this is a man he's a bisexual man who is having affairs on his wife with men and women, but neither of these are actually addressed. They're kind of alluded to in his relationship with her. He's struggling with alcohol and drugs, But again, we don't ever see the consequences of these choices. And at the same time, he is obsessed with music, and his obsession with music and his pursuit of becoming the greatest composer ever is never really
Explored. I
to
think
the
that's
point that we don't ever see it and how it affects his life and his children and his family and things like that.
right. It's just sort of like he's great at music. And then that's it. They're like, he's just great.
We
Like
don't
we
see
never
the
sort of,
costs of the pursuit of perfection.
yeah, right. Like the movie doesn't frame it in a way that makes it seem like he like, you know, the weight of the world is so heavy on his shoulders that the only way he can relax is like to get high or to like,
Mhm.
that's his release. Like it might be implied, but it's definitely not, overtly sort of this is why he does what he does. I mean, a lot of people party, rock stars party.
Mhm.
There's nothing inherently, weight on your shoulders scenario that means that that's why you party. We as the audience could just infer that, but the movie's not really telling us one way or the other. We're kind of like, I don't know. I mean, I guess he likes to party.
Yeah. And so we don't see the consequences of these things. I think a real shame is like if we were to compare it to something like the Ed Harris film Pollock from 2000. I don't know if you've ever seen it,
No,
but
I
it's
have not.
about the artist Pollock and his pursuit of his true passion in life, which is art, and how he destroys the relationships with people around him because the only thing he wants to do is create art. And
Mm.
I feel like we're missing that element of what is the cost of being a true genius and what is the cost of truly, being innovative creatively. And we don't see that in this film. It's just like he made good music. He was an okay father. Like, and I think that that's the tension in his life that would have been really interesting to explore in film.
Yeah, I also think it was interesting that in the second half of the film, in a lot of ways, I felt his wife ended up story wise having more agency than he did, where she almost becomes the main character in the story, having to actually deal with the other side of those affairs, of sort of knowing what he's doing when he's not at home, the headlines that affect their kids. And
Mhm.
then to that end, she ends up, getting cancer and unfortunately passing away. But the film focuses very, very heavily on this, but almost from her perspective, not from his perspective as it's happening. They cut to him and he sort of comes home and puts on this happy smile. But it's kind of from her
Well,
perspective.
and
So I
even
thought
to the
that was a
point
little
that
weird.
this was a huge opportunity of character choice where he puts aside his career and he puts aside touring and making music to and he puts aside even the lover he's having an affair with to return to his wife and support her through this, but we don't actually really see him explore those sacrifices. It's
Yeah.
kind of a one-sided phone call where he's like, well, what else am I supposed to do? Of course I'm, and I felt like Bradley Cooper was intentionally robbing us of all the juicy dramatic moments in this man's life, and it
Yeah.
really bothered me.
I did want to ask you, do you think so? In the first half, the movie is sort of black and white, and it's almost like the characters speak more like Shakespearean dialogue.
Mhm.
Do you think this was intentional? Because the movie starts off with an older Leonard Bernstein sort of like telling stories. I almost got the impression that they were sort of the further back you went, he was romanticizing the way that it was. And then as the movie continues, at a certain point, it's like his memories are clearer and he almost has to like confront some of the stuff later in life.
That's an
Just
interesting take.
I don't know. I just felt that like they have like this dance sequence. And do you remember that scene where they're
Mhm.
like standing on a stage after they first, sorry, him and his wife
And
or
there's
his future
and
wife?
yeah, and there's all these sailors and stuff. Yeah.
It just felt very romanticized. Like they walk around in gardens and it looks like how you would want to remember
Hmm.
that, even if it's not how it really happened, which I think plays in to the later aspect of like part of the affairs and stuff, in the sense that, you know, we may have this romanticized version of, early romance, and then later it's sort of like it's not like that anymore,
Mm.
you know, and
That's
you
interesting. Yeah.
I thought that I don't know. I couldn't figure out exactly why they were shifting the dynamic of like literally the cinematography, the dialogue, color, like they literally switch it up halfway through. And I couldn't put my finger on exactly why, but that was kind of the conclusion I arrived at.
Well, you bring it up because another film nominated for Best Picture, right? Oppenheimer
Yeah.
has two very distinct styles between when we're following Strauss or when we're following Oppenheimer, but it's explains cinematically and story wise why we have two distinct styles. And I don't think Bradley Cooper made it clear to us why we had a black and white film and a color film shot night and day from each other. The other problem I had with the film is, and I'm not going to quote him completely, but I remember Bradley Cooper saying a line about how he wanted this film, he wanted the music to shine through, something along those lines,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, I get, which of course you would think it would.
But it was a little weird in the sense that this is a film about a composer. And I was wondering why, when we compare it to another film about a composer, Amadeus, right? There are sequences where we're essentially in his head watching him create music. And I felt like we never got that level of a focus on music itself in this film.
They do have a very visceral sequence where he is conducting sort of his masterpiece.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying, because it doesn't feel like we're privy to what it's like to conduct in that moment.
Creative, artistic
we're privy,
process.
yeah, we're privy to watch a master at work.
Yes.
But we're watching from the outside. We're not in what's happening. We're just seeing, right, the sweat coming down and how into it. And then you would make kind of the same, assumptions that probably people in the audience would, like, man, this guy is so intense and this and that. And it never takes us into his head. We're still looking from the outside, even though I think the way that scene is shot, I think it's really good. It's very intense. Again, I don't know that the music per se is the focus. I think us watching him work is the focus, but the music is there, and it is, sort of allowing his intensity. But yeah, that was interesting because I didn't find the score itself to be incredibly memorable in a way, or even like, how do I say it? Like delightful. Like I remember seeing the movie. Do you remember The Terminal by Steven Spielberg?
Yes.
Or like Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think they're both John Williams, but like, I can't hum the music right now, but I remember being sort of delighted by it. Like I liked it. It was playful. There was something about it that just worked for what they were doing in those films. And for this one, yes, like obviously you would draw from the music that the real man actually wrote and you put that in the film. But it just, I don't know, it didn't connect with me, I think, the way other scores maybe have. So where, like, I don't know, I was kind of hoping that like after seeing this movie, I'd want to get home and like go put on some music that, he wrote or conducted.
Yeah.
I wasn't motivated.
Yeah, I just thought that was odd. And
so I do have one other thing I want to talk to you about, which is you brought this point up, and I actually do sort of agree with you. It feels a little bit like this movie was made as a vehicle for Bradley Cooper. I don't want to say like vanity, like he just wanted to win awards, because I don't know to the degree which he appreciates Leonard Bernstein, especially after having made the film and all of that stuff. So I'm not here to question that, but it just, from an acting standpoint, it does seem like a film that's primed to get nominations for Best Actor.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you think he did? How do you think Bradley Cooper did in the role?
I mean, I look at it and I don't even think it's Bradley Cooper's best performance.
I actually thought he did great.
Okay.
That was one thing that I really did enjoy, was he has a really sort of fast talking quality to him, and he sort of keeps people at a distance. And that's how I felt most of the film, but it felt very deliberate through the performance, that he is not very honest with what he's saying. And to that end, we don't feel like we truly get to know him on that intimate level. And I thought the performance does this, even right out of the gate. like when he's sitting at the piano and he's sort of talking to the documentary crew. He's talking, but he's not saying much, right?
Mhm.
He's like
Yeah, that's
remembering
true.
something and it's very profound, but you're kind of like, I don't know, you're not really he's keeping people at a distance.
Mhm.
And with the way that the movie actually comes off, if that is truly the intention here, I think the performance really backs that up. And I thought it was very good. Now, granted, like you said, I don't actually know the real man. Like, I haven't seen video clips of him. I've seen photos. So I don't know how he actually talked, or, sometimes I think we literally compare like apples to apples. Like, does he look just like him? But for a movie, you don't need to, right?
True.
Yeah. I mean, I know for a fact that William Wallace looked like what's his name?
Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson. That's how William Wallace looked. But everybody else in history, I mean, who knows? Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. But so to that end, like the look and all of that, like sure, maybe that works. But I thought in terms of they age him throughout the film. I thought he looked great. The makeup and stuff worked for me. And I thought his performance was good. He did feel consistent throughout the film. He was clearly hiding a lot of things, not comfortable about talking about his truths. And I thought that came through. He just, there's that scene where his wife accuses him of having hate in his heart. And she later backtracks on that. But it's just, I think, because even his wife, doesn't truly know him.
Yeah.
And so you just like, you make that proclamation, you want to hurt somebody in that scene. And that is a beautifully acted scene by both of them. Thought they both knocked it out of the park. I thought she actually had a fantastic performance too.
Oh, no, I would agree.
I mean, her performance was pretty heartbreaking at the end once she has cancer and everything. You're like, damn. So, but I thought he did a great job with the performance. Now, is it best actor level? Based on my previous stuff, I think I'm going with Oppenheimer here, Cillian Murphy. But that's maybe personal preference. But yeah, I did think that shone through.
Okay.
And then my final thought is, I think when I look at Maestro, I asked myself after, I was kind of like, would I watch this again? And I was kind of like, maybe if it was on, but I don't know that I would be like, oh, I want to watch that again. If that makes sense.
And honestly, I think that's the best test of a movie, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So now the other film we watched was Alexander Payne's The Holdovers.
Yes.
And it was a very different type of film.
It was not really, I mean, humor wise, it was exactly what I was expecting. Like humor wise, definitely. I was like, oh, this is the tone I expected from this film. But story wise, it wasn't. It wasn't quite what I thought. Actually, it was going to be closer. So for anybody that doesn't know, the term the holdovers means that apparently people are holding over winter or summer break when they attend, a school or academy that you actually stay at.
Yeah.
So I don't know what they called it specifically, what the school name was. But anyway, so there's actually a group of people that hold over. I think, a great example is like if you watch Harry Potter, he often stayed, over like Christmas break. He was a holdover. And I thought the movie, it starts off with them as a group. And I thought that was how it was going to go. So they kind of threw a curveball at me, which is that out of nowhere, one of the kids' rich fathers comes with a helicopter and takes all of them away, except for the two main characters. One whom hates Paul Giamatti's teacher character and literally wants to leave, but he can't get parent permission. So it ends up that them, along with one of the cooks or the chefs in the kitchen, three people are essentially stuck, not a whole group of people. And I don't know. Tell us a little bit more about the holdovers.
Well, the first thing is the holdovers is very much in the style of other Alexander Payne movies. And the main character was written for Paul Giamatti.
I mean, he seriously was.
The first takeaway from the film is you watch it, and you're like, yeah, that was a role made for Paul Giamatti.
I mean, I know he won awards and all that. And it's weird because here I am talking about Bradley Cooper as Leonard Bernstein and, sort of how that performance was. And in this case, it's like, I don't want to say Paul Giamatti was like playing himself, but that is exactly the character I expected. That is the performance I expected from him. It felt like the character was written for him.
It's really ironic because Payne also directed the film Sideways. And I know we've talked about this. This is almost the exact same intellectual, kind of elitist, curmudgeon-y character that he plays in Sideways just 20 years later.
Like, if you told me that character from Sideways, this was where he ended up, I'd believe it. I'd be like, same character.
Yeah. So the role was written for Paul Giamatti, and so much of it is based on him. But I think the other really smart thing is the decision to set the film on the holidays and the decision to intentionally date it into the 70s.
Yeah.
Kind of add this air of timelessness to the film that I think if it had been set as a film taking place today, I don't think it would have been received in the same way.
Yeah, I do agree with you about the holidays. I think it adds a certain level of charm to the film. You know, the holidays sort of bring people together. And as I mentioned, all three of these holdovers are at sort of great odds. So the cook, she actually lost her son when he got drafted. And I don't know if it's the 70s. Was it that Vietnam then?
Yeah.
I think it was Vietnam,
it was
not
in
Korea,
Vietnam.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. So she had lost her son, so she's sort of keeping everybody at distance. She's in a vulnerable state and isn't really ready to let people in at this point. Paul Giamatti is sort of the old curmudgeon teacher, a little stereotypical in a way. He doesn't take flack from his students, and all of his students hate him, including the holdover, who appears to be sort of like a spoiled brat and an entitled student who, sort of just does what he wants and sort of cakewalks through life because there's, he views himself after some of his past familial issues as somebody who will end up, getting screwed over anyway. So he's very entitled, off-puttish, and doesn't, really want to engage. So the film works in that sense with the holidays because I think the holidays bring people together naturally. We have parties, there's literal Christmas cheer. I mean, you just got to see the tree and you'll be like, oh, all right. We have dinners together and we do things that are just different than other times of the year. And so I think the holidays work as a great backdrop. And I agree too with you that I think the movie also, by dating it, it is a Christmas movie. So there, now we're talking about actual where it stands among like Christmas films, and could you watch this sort of every year? And by dating it, I think they allow it to sort of have a timeless quality that will work for it. You could put this on, tomorrow or 10 years from now. It still kind of works.
Yeah.
It's not dependent on cell phones. I mean, apparently helicopters, but
yeah,
it's just not plot driven that way with like stuff of the time. So
when we look at the film, I come back to, I think the line in the movie that really summarizes the whole thing, and I'm just going to paraphrase it. It's at towards the end of the film, and Paul Giamatti tells the holdover that we are not all destined to become our fathers, right? This is very much a film about destiny, so much so that this professor of ancient civilizations is talking about the Greeks' understanding of fate and destiny. And he's alluding to these things very early on in the film. And essentially, the characters learn that they are not defined by what is expected of them, including of what they expect of themselves. And I think that because of that, it's actually a very powerful film.
Yeah, I think it, to piggyback on that quote, I think the movie actually provides a prior scene at a museum in which to contrast that quote, which is he is an ancient history teacher. And he basically, they're looking at art and it sort of has a pornographic element to it. And he goes on this rant about how like every generation thinks they've invented all these new things and all this stuff. And he's like, it's all in history. You can look back in time and predict the future, right? All you have to do is see what other people did, no matter how far back you go. And that's what they're going to do in the future. And so there's this sort of destiny or predetermined element to the movie. Now, the movie does an excellent job of layering their stories and their character histories here because both characters are sort of defined by a little bit of their past, or at least that's how they see themselves. That's how they view their self-image. And so in Paul Giamatti's case, it's that he was kicked out of Harvard for really something that wasn't his fault. And then he kind of erupted in anger and got kicked out. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
Now, in the Holdovers case, this is where the whole father's quote comes in. The most of the movie, we're led to believe that his father most likely passed away or abandoned the family, right? We don't know for sure. And then you find out that his father has mental illness and is actually in like a state mental facility, right? And now through that lens, we realize that both characters are kind of stuck in their past. You have Paul Giamatti's character who went back to his safe haven, which was this school where
Barton Academy.
Yeah, Barton Academy. That's what it is. Yeah, I was like, what do you call that? Like I don't know. Well, anyway, right, he just kind of retreats into safety and isn't really taking any chances. He's just kind of stuck, right?
Yep.
Stuck in his love life, stuck on writing his book, stuck literally in the place that he's at. He got stuck as a holdover.
Yeah.
Like he's stuck. That's his character thing. And then you have this kid who just doesn't believe that he has a future, right? Defined by his past. And that quote just stands so strong because he says it, right? He says this and he shared this intimate information about getting kicked out of Harvard. Nobody knows this except the headmaster. No one knows this about him. He shares it with this kid. And then he tells this kid this quote, we're not defined or we're not destined to become our fathers, right? Now that quote could potentially ring hollow because the movie plays this out where it actually brings those two threads to a point, which is fantastic. That's exactly what you want good stories to do.
Good writing.
Yeah, that's amazing writing. That's, and then it makes everything that's happened in the movie prior to this very, very important. And what they do is basically they set the kid up to get kicked out of Barton Academy. And that's because he went to go see his father over the winter break, which his parents strictly forbid. And for that reason, they want Paul Giamatti's character fired. Of which he then takes the fall again.
Well,
but this time,
let's be clear. Originally, they want to pull the kid.
Yeah.
And so Paul Giamatti.
They want to send him to military academy, I think is what it is.
Yep.
So they say like, hey, this is unacceptable behavior from the academy. We're going to pull our kid and we're going to put him in military academy, which he states earlier is one of his great fears and essentially would fulfill his destiny as not really having the future that he wants for himself. And instead, Paul Giamatti steps up and basically takes the fall and says that I took him. I wanted him to go see his father over the holidays. And he takes the blame again, just like he did at Harvard, but this time in an empowering manner. And fulfilling that quote that, right, you aren't destined to become your father. This kid's future is assured, and Paul Giamatti now is not stuck. He's unstuck. And he can finally move on. Yeah. And I thought it worked. I thought it worked really well. I liked it. You can probably tell I got passionate about it.
Well, as you said, the story is complete. The arcs of the characters are fulfilled, but more importantly, it's done in a relatable, charming manner that has the thing you and I talk about on the show all the time that we love in movies, heart. And this is the type of movie that as soon as it was done, I thought, I will definitely watch this movie again.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to watch it as much as like Home Alone or Elf around the holidays, but it probably will make my rotation of holiday films. That'll definitely be something that I'd be interested in watching again, as well as it's a movie that doesn't necessarily demand to be viewed at Christmas. So you can always just put it on. So I don't know. And then another element of the film that I thought worked pretty well was the humor. It has that, Anderson humor. And they have quite a few gags. Like, at one point he dislocates his arm while messing around in the gym. The kids have some wisecracks. He gets to be the old curmudgeon. They have a few cool scenes where like they go to a party and he's, they're interacting with girls and different things. I thought it worked. It had a real good charm.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree.
But I think the biggest thing, when you bring up that quote is, I mean, you can literally feel the movie pinnacling right there.
mhm,
Like you're like, we're in the climax. And it's weird because they're just sitting at a dinner table.
mhm.
This isn't Avengers. There's not this huge, literal like battle lines, clash. You're like, it's just this. And you sort of feel like you know where it's going. It
Mhm.
actually kind of reminds me a little bit of do you remember Scent of a Woman with Al
Yeah.
Pacino?
Mhm. Mhm.
This movie kind of reminded me of that, where like in Son of a Woman, you have a student who basically takes a job to come be a caretaker to an old military blind man, and instead this guy, goes to New York and they go on this journey, which again they do here. I don't know if I pointed that out, but in order to go see his father in the mental facility, they actually go to Boston. They leave the academy, which is
Mhm.
why his parents are so upset.
Yeah.
And they sort of go on this trip the youngster and the older guy connect and they sort of have this understanding, and then at the end the old guy sort of stands up for the young kid and assures that his future is safe. And so they're not the same movie, but I can see parallels where you're like, that dynamic works really well.
Yeah, and I mean, again, when we look at this story, it's nothing original. It's probably in line with what Campbell always talked about as the fundamental role of storytelling, right? Is passing one generation, passing on wisdom of how to live a fulfilling life to the next generation. And that's what this is about. But it's executed so well because the arcs of both characters and the way that their characterization is peeled back and revealed to the audience is done in a way that it naturally leads both of them to this revelation that as the audience we experience. And I think that's why it's so great.
Yeah, and they do a great job. Paul Giamatti's character self-sacrifices at the end for this kid, and when you see them at the beginning, I would not believe it. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, he wouldn't do it.
Yep.
It's transformation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's changed and we're changed, right? Like that's good
Yep.
storytelling. And I like that.
I totally agree.
So, there was a lot to like, I think even the relationship between them and the cook and sort of humbling themselves. I mean, a little bit, she's cooking for them, but she's the one who lost her son, and sort of how can they all find equal footing works really well.
No,
So, and then how
I
does she,
absolutely agree. Yeah.
right? And how does she find hope again?
Mm-hmm.
And she does, through other kind of a little side quest. But it was good. I don't know. I found it to work.
Now, the one thing that really disappoints me about it is I actually think Paul Giamatti is great, but I agree with what you said earlier. I don't think he's going to beat Cillian Murphy.
No,
And
yeah.
I don't know that the film is going to beat Oppenheimer. And I actually really enjoyed it.
I can't even
I
describe to
really
you how much
enjoyed
I love Oppenheimer. Like, I've probably watched it like 10 times.
it.
I just enjoy it. I think Christopher Nolan is just a master at, you look at Interstellar or Inception, he just asks good questions and he just gets me so intrigued into his content and these
Mhm.
characters. And like, I mean, it was crazy, dude. I literally remember it was like a week or two ago. I was reading something about a lab at Berkeley and it was called
Lawrence
like the
Livermore.
Lawrence. Yeah. And I was like, is that the Lawrence from Oppenheimer? And then I had to go look it up and I was like, oh my God, dude, love this movie. So even at this point, obviously I still have, as I mentioned, I still have a few more movies to see. I do think Oppenheimer's got to be the front runner. I mean, I loved it.
Well, when we look at, if the awards season to this point is any indication of what's going on with the Oscars, then I think you're totally right about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is it's the front runner in the way that Top Gun Maverick isn't. Right? Where I love Top Gun Maverick. That movie was incredible, great theater experience, but I was like, it has no shot at winning. I mean,
Mhm.
it's not going to win,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Where this, I'm like, it is that movie. I feel like it's that movie. It's Christopher Nolan's like crowning achievement. I mean, I'm not even
Mhm.
sure why we're talking about Oppenheimer right now, just because I'm so excited. So, and I'll be rooting, man. I'll be rooting for Christopher Nolan. I think the Academy Awards need a little bit of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm probably going to tune in. Like, I'm going to watch it anyway, but like, I'm going to be a little bit more excited this year because I'm like, I want to see Christopher Nolan sort of get that cap on his career because, I mean, I love him as a director.
Yeah, right.
So it's exciting. You know, the Oscars are coming up. Like you said, I don't know if either of the performances in this will warrant an actual Academy Award, but I do fully understand why both are nominated. I thought they were both really good performances. For anybody that does go check out Maestro, it's on Netflix. Try to get through like the first like 30 minutes and the story will really sort of get going. But I think it's a little tough at the beginning to get on board because I think the character himself is a little off-puttish, and then it has like this dance number and these things where you're kind of like, what is this? If you can sort of like get there and keep going, it's pretty good. So anyway, CP, that does it for our episode this week. I don't know what else to say other than I cannot wait to go see Dune in the theater. So line it up. I'm just so excited to be back in the theater. I know I think we mentioned a few weeks ago when we brought the show back that during the holidays I was so busy with all these different things and travel. I sort of fell off getting to the theater maybe once a week, and I'm back. I'm trying to go every week.
Yay.
So
yeah, dude, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm very excited. And this is a movie that I've been waiting for a while. In fact, was, like you said, really amped to just get it because I didn't know at first if we would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So can't wait to talk about it.
It's a lot
I'm probably going to call you. You better be awake at like 2:30 in the morning.
I mean, I'll probably be coming out of Dune the same time you are, man.
Yeah. Probably call you and be like, I got to talk about it. So I always remember calling you like after I would go see the Disney Star Wars movies, even though you didn't see them. And I'm like, I got to talk to somebody. You're like, go ahead, D-man. Just let it rip. I'm like, oh my God. You know, I have my qualms with Star Wars, but whatever. Well, anyway, to our listeners, just want to say thank you all so much for tuning in. We really appreciate you guys, and we're just happy to be podcasting again. So be sure to follow the podcast at filmmakerscompass.com, where we have all of our social media links as well as a feed to all the previous episodes. Be sure to follow the show at FilmCompPod or podcast on any of the major social media where we do post pretty frequently. CP, you have some great movie reviews as you're coming out of the theater, which I love that raw passion. You know, by the time we get here, we have sort of an analysis that we get into, but when you come right out of the theater, man, it's just so great because you're like, I hate it. Or you're like, that was incredible. And it's that raw passion that you only get right as you leave. And that's why it's fun to go with people, because you want to talk with your friends right after you see it.
True.
And I mean, you just share that with all of our listeners. So it's fantastic. So be sure to follow the show and catch CP's movie reviews. Maybe I'll join you and just share my passions. You can follow me at Big Kid D-Man and CP.
You can follow me at NDCal5. Thanks for hanging out and talking about some of the Academy Award nominees this year. We will see you back here next week. Until then, keep watching movies.